In the hotel's grand lobby, golden lights shimmered against the marble floor. Evan Carter, senior manager, tilted his head slightly, his voice so sharp it seemed to freeze the air. "Take Darnell to the back. Don't let him wander in front of the CEO's delegation." The words cut like a knife through the silence. Darnell Brooks, in his crisp security uniform, stood still. He said nothing, only tightened his grip on the walkie-talkie, eyes tracking the stream of VIP guests entering the hall. To them, he was nothing more than decor. A black jacket, a small glinting badge, the symbol of a doorman. But what they couldn't see was the current swirling beneath his calm gaze. Darnell understood Japanese. Not just a few polite phrases, but fluent business Japanese, the kind that had let him devour trade journals late at night, word by word. Yet in this moment, power tilted entirely toward Evan. From the echo of leather shoes against marble to the ticking seconds on his radio, everything reminded Darnell that he was merely the invisible gatekeeper. An outsider to the game of power, despite secretly holding the one key that could save this make-or-break meeting. The conference room gleamed ready. Slides were tested, the massive screen lit up with the words, "Welcome, Mr. Takahashi," a shimmering auto-translation beneath. Oliver Grant, head of sales, smirked. "We've got the translation app, no worries." Claire Benson, PR manager, nodded as she adjusted her lapel mic. The team clung to technology like a lifeline. Every greeting, every introduction was set to be auto-translated on screen. Even the strategic slides had already been fed into the software, ready to appear in English and Japanese side by side. Only Darnell, standing near the door, caught a glimpse of the words flickering across the screen. Subtle errors and nuanced mistakes only a real speaker would notice. He bit his lip, stayed silent. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. The wall clock showed 5 minutes left before the Japanese CEOs arrived. The team exhaled, believing they were solidly prepared. They had no idea that their supposed safety net was actually a trap waiting to snap shut. And as the cold blue light of the projector flickered across tense faces, an unspoken truth emerged. Technology could never replace understanding. A few days earlier, in a closed-door meeting, the pressure was suffocating. Evan slammed his hand on the table. "Remember, this CEO Takahashi is obsessed with etiquette. Don't make a single mistake." On the big screen, the preparation checklist glowed. Room decor, bowing protocol, the order of serving sake. Every superficial detail was crammed in, but not one line addressed the language barrier. Oliver had beamed as he presented his slides. "All we need is a killer first impression. The app will handle the rest." Claire chimed in. "We've got to overwhelm them with luxury." In the corner, Darnell had been called in only to stand in for a security check, he quietly observed. His ears caught every mispronounced Japanese term, every cultural nuance brushed aside. He knew it was a fatal blind spot. But a security uniform didn't give him a voice. Evan, at the head of the table, tapped his fingers with smug rhythm, his authority stamping out any dissent. The meeting ended with satisfied nods. Only one man left, heavy-hearted, Darnell, the only one who understood the storm that was coming. Late at night, the hotel hallways dimmed, the only glow spilling from the security room. On a worn wooden desk, between stacks of security manuals and shift schedules, lay hardbound books in Japanese. Darnell sat there, leaning back, his patient eyes gliding across pages like old friends. He read analyses of Japanese consumer trends, essays on omotenashi, the art of wholehearted service. Each term was underlined, annotated with his neat pencil marks and private symbols. No one at the hotel knew that beneath the black uniform, Darnell had trained himself for years, treating language as the key to the world. A cracked mosaic mirror on the wall reflected his face in fragments, a bitter coincidence. He was a man of many facets, yet only seen through the uniform he wore. The crackle of the walkie-talkie snapped him back. Darnell closed the book, tucked it into the drawer. In a few hours, the Japanese CEO would arrive. He knew he held something none of the managers had. But would he ever be allowed to use it, or remain forever the nameless guard at the door? The next morning, luxury cars lined the plaza, gleaming under the sun. Men in dark suits stepped out, moving with quiet authority, eyes cool and unreadable. At their center, Kenji Takahashi, the multi-million-dollar CEO, advanced with measured calm. Beside him, his aide Ito fussed over details, adjusting a jacket crease, directing the entourage. Inside the grand lobby, Evan and his team stood in formation. Forced smiles, bows a shade too deep, all feeding the tension. The Japanese rarely showed emotion, but one slight frown from Kenji was enough to thicken the air. At the edge of the hall, Darnell lingered in shadow, watching. He felt the invisible line drawn. One side lit for the powerful, the other cloaked for the unseen. The sound of leather shoes striking marble echoed louder than the air conditioning. Each step drove deeper into the skewed balance of power. And in that moment, Darnell understood this wasn't just a business deal. It was about who would be seen and who would remain invisible. The tour began. Evan led the delegation through the hotel, pointing out every luxury: hand-carved ceilings, the Japanese-style bar, the gilded banquet room. His smile was tight, straining to hide his nerves. Ito began rapid-fire questions in Japanese, testing them. The hired interpreter flipped frantically through notes, stumbling over words. This is a traditional service counter? Kenji's brow furrowed, his finger tapping lightly against the dossier in his hand. The energy sagged. Handouts were distributed, printed in 2 languages, but the Japanese text was clumsy, some sentences outright wrong. Claire's eyes darted nervously. Oliver glanced at his watch, sweat beading on his forehead. From his corner, Darnell absorbed every mistranslation, every distorted phrase. His chest tightened as if the insult were his own. Still, his mouth stayed shut, his hands clasped behind his back. A soft sigh escaped Kenji, barely audible, yet enough to rattle the entire group. The meeting had barely begun, and already cracks had formed. And with his instincts, Darnell knew if no one bridged this language gap, the deal would collapse right before their eyes. The 20th floor boardroom glittered under the lights, the massive LED screen already set with the opening slide. English text on top, Japanese below it looked flawless at first glance. Evan cleared his throat and motioned for the CEO to take a seat. Oliver, brimming with confidence, clicked the remote. The next line flashed, "Our security is solid as a mooncake festival." The awkward Japanese translation made Ito's brow twitch while Kenji stayed silent. A ripple of discomfort spread across the table. Oliver forced a strained smile, just a little software glitch. He quickly jumped to the next slide. This time, the app translated high-risk investment into a dangerous children's game. A murmur swept the room. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Evan clenched his jaw, signaling sharply at the tech team to fix it. From the corner, Darnell stood by the door, his eyes catching the exact moment Kenji tapped his fingers on the table, a subtle sign of displeasure. Darnell understood every mistake, every warped nuance, but to everyone else, the collapse closing in was invisible. The projector whirred, struggling. The next slide stuttered on screen, translations glitching. The air grew heavy, as though someone had sucked the oxygen out of the room. 10 minutes later, the meeting paused. The door shut behind them, the hallway outside thick with tension. Evan frantically dialed the backup interpreter. On the other end, only an automated voice. "The line is busy, please leave a message." Claire clutched her papers, sweat dripping onto the pages. Oliver snapped. "We can't go on like this." They're about to walk out. "Calm down," Evan growled. "We just need to hold it together a little longer." But the wall clock wasn't waiting. The second hand ticked forward, pounding against everyone's chest. From the shadows of the hall, Darnell listened. He caught every fragmented whisper, felt the panic vibrating through the team as they patched holes with desperate phone calls. A technician rushed past, muttering, "Font error in the slides, can't fix it fast." No one answered. The tension stretched tight as a wire. Inside, trust with the Japanese partners was cracking. Outside, the management team was unraveling. And at the edge of the hallway, Darnell clenched his fists, knowing the moment of collapse was closing in. Back in the boardroom, the weight was suffocating. Kenji quietly closed his leather folio, eyes dropping to the table instead of facing the team. In Japanese culture, that gesture was clear. Trust was gone. Ms. Ito spoke carefully, this time in slow English. Perhaps it would be better to postpone the discussion. Her words landed like a hammer on Evan. He paled, blurting, Please, sir, just some technical issues, nothing more. But the silence that followed was louder than rejection. Claire glanced at Kenji's platinum watch, each minute hand sweeping closer to failure. Oliver fumbled with the remote, but the slides froze on screen, stuck on a half-finished sentence in gibberish Japanese. At the far end, Darnell could feel it, the CEO's subtle gestures, Ito's restrained breaths, all screaming the same truth. The deal was slipping away. All their meticulous rituals, bows, sake, chandeliers, were meaningless now. They had ignored the one thing that mattered most, language and understanding. And unless something shifted, every door would slam shut. Here and now. The room sank into dead silence. The sharp click of Kenji's pen as he capped it signaled the end. At that exact moment, Darnell's eyes dropped to his black gloves. They were the symbol of his job, meant to keep him from touching anything beyond his guard duty. Fragments of memory crashed in. A classroom years ago, laughter when he botched a polite Japanese phrase. The shame had stuck, burying his gift behind the safety of silence. Since then, he had hidden his language skills behind the uniform. But now, watching a multi-million-dollar deal collapse simply for lack of a voice, he knew silence would make him complicit. Darnell drew a slow breath. His trembling hands peeled off the gloves, finger by finger, and set them on the security desk near the door. A small act, but for him, it marked a line he could never step back from. He lifted his head and locked eyes with Kenji Takahashi. The air was so tense, a single breath sounded like a drum beat. Then, from the silence, his voice rose steady, unmistakable. Sumimasen. The sound cut through the room. Every head snapped toward the back, where Darnell stood. Darnell, you! Evan shot up, but before he could finish, Kenji tilted his head, waiting. With calm precision, Darnell continued in flawless business Japanese, complete with proper honorifics and cadence. The room froze. Ito wasted no time testing him. Explain our view on risk management. In Japanese. Darnell didn't hesitate. He replied smoothly, using the correct technical terms. Kenji's eyes flickered with surprise, then interest. The hired interpreter lowered his gaze in shame. The entire room sat in stunned silence. Just retranslate. Don't stir things up, Evan barked. But Kenji raised a hand, silencing him. His gaze locked on Darnell, the corner of his mouth lifting ever so slightly, a quiet acknowledgement. The tension in the room drained, replaced by the quiet rhythm of breathing, the tap of a pen. In that instant, the balance shifted. The invisible guard now commanded the full attention of a multi-million-dollar CEO. For the first time, Darnell wasn't invisible. The atmosphere transformed. Kenji gestured, and a chair beside him was pulled out. Please, sit, he said in Japanese. Evan froze, ready to protest. Mr. Takahashi, he's only. But Kenji had already turned away, waiting on Darnell. Each of Darnell's steps toward the table echoed in the room, his heartbeat matching the cadence. He sat, back straight, gaze unwavering. Oliver slid the documents toward him, muttering under his breath. Just translate, don't overdo it. But Kenji no longer addressed Oliver or Evan. He spoke directly to Darnell, discussing strategy. And Darnell didn't just translate, he adjusted tone and nuance, ensuring intent carried through. Claire noticed it first. The shift in the room. Every eye that had once been on Evan now belonged to Darnell. While Evan clutched the slide remote like a lifeline, Kenji had already decided he wanted to hear from the man once dismissed as a guard. In that moment, Darnell was no longer a middleman. He had crossed into territory no one imagined he belonged to. A silence stretched. Then Kenji set down his pen and, to everyone's shock, pulled out the chair beside him. Sit as my equal. I want to hear directly from you. The room froze. Evan's face flushed red with fury. Oliver's eyes went wide, and Claire exhaled sharply, as if witnessing the impossible. But Kenji turned his full attention to Darnell, ignoring the rest. The invisible wall between security guard and executive shattered. Darnell was no longer just echoing words, he was being recognized as a partner. He sat calmly, hands folded on the table, eyes steady. No gloves, no uniform, just a man with intellect and deep cultural respect. Sunlight from the tall windows spilled across his face, as if the world was finally seeing him. With that simple pull of a chair, Kenji had flipped the entire game. The power now belonged to the man who, minutes earlier, had stood unnoticed in the corner. Darnell didn't waste the chance. When Kenji asked about Japanese customer expectations, he began, "It's not just luxury rooms. The Japanese look for omotenashi attentiveness in every detail. For instance, the front desk bow must be at the precise angle. During meals, service must flow seamlessly, never rushed, never intrusive." He gestured toward the lobby through the window. Imagine a Japanese delegation arriving. They'll notice the placement of water glasses, the arrangement of flowers. These aren't details, they're measures of respect. Kenji listened in silence, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. Ito's eyes brightened with agreement. Meanwhile, Evan and Oliver sat rigid, as if every word was stripping their authority away. The room softened, no slide deck, no app. Just Darnell's warm, steady voice carrying insight born from years of study. For the first time, the meeting wasn't shaky. It had rhythm, it had soul, and it was being led by the man they once dismissed. Kenji leaned back, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Slowly, he drew out a business card and offered it to Darnell with both hands, a formal gesture reserved only for those he deeply respected. "You understand our perspective," Kenji said in Japanese. The words rang like a seal of approval. Ito even smiled a rare, genuine nod at Darnell's precision. The room fell into silence again, but now it was the silence of respect. Evan fidgeted, unsure where to look. Oliver lowered his gaze. Only Claire allowed herself a quiet sigh of relief. The meeting had been pulled back from the brink. Darnell accepted the card with both hands, bowing properly. In that moment, he wasn't a guard in a black uniform. He was an equal partner, the one who built a cultural bridge where everyone else had only seen a chasm. The tension that had gripped the room was gone. In its place, a new atmosphere of trust settled in, a trust no slide, no app could ever have created. And Darnell wasn't done. He flipped through the dossier, already familiar. In Japanese, he outlined, "To serve Japanese guests, operations must rest on 3 pillars: kitchen, payments, and front desk." He laid out a clear checklist: multi-language payment systems, accurate menu translations, reception staff trained in proper bows and forms of address. Kenji tilted his head, his sharp eyes no longer skeptical but intent. "Even seating arrangements matter," Darnell continued. "Hierarchy is vital in Japanese culture. One misplaced seat can be seen as disrespect." He pointed outside the glass, where a staff member bowed politely to a guest. That's where it starts. Small acts accumulate into trust. Ito leaned toward Kenji, whispering. For the first time that day, the CEO nodded. The storm had passed. A new horizon opened, guided by the very man they had overlooked. But just as the air began to clear, Evan suddenly snatched the remote. He clicked hard, flipping to a new slide. "We have a clear strategy. There's no need to drag this out," he snapped, desperate to reclaim control. The screen lit up, "exclusive luxury package for Japan market." But the Japanese line below mangled it into "luxury package for the children's market." Kenji's brow furrowed. Ito looked up, eyes sharp. The room froze in embarrassment. Evan's voice caught in his throat. Before he could recover, Kenji cut him off, calm, firm, unyielding. Let him continue. The words landed like a gavel. Every head turned back to Darnell. Evan stood stunned, the remote trembling in his hand, clinging to the last scraps of power. But clearly, the balance had shifted. Darnell didn't say another word, just gave a slight nod before continuing, his voice calm and steady. The facade of authority had been stripped bare. In that room, everyone understood Evan was no longer the one leading. Another silence fell. Ms. Ito leaned forward, eyes fixed on Darnell. In Japanese, she asked, "Forgive me, but why would someone like you settle for being just a security guard?" Her words cut like a blade, exposing the entire room. Oliver's head snapped up, Claire's mouth fell open, Evan smirked, sensing an opening to strike back. Darnell stayed silent for a few seconds, his gaze moving across every face. He remembered the jobs he'd been denied because of his skin color, the contemptuous looks when he applied for higher roles. At last, he spoke slowly, but with clarity. A job doesn't define a person's worth. I chose security work to make a living, but that doesn't mean I lack ability or dreams. The room froze. Kenji listened intently, his stern expression softening into thought. Darnell's answer wasn't just for Ms. Ito, it was for the entire system built on prejudice and status. His eyes shone not with the desperation of a man seeking pity, but with the conviction of someone who had found his voice. In that moment, he forced everyone to confront a truth. Worth isn't measured by a title. Just as the tension threatened to break, Kenji placed the file back on the table. His voice was firm, this time in Japanese. "We will continue. The preliminary agreement can be signed today." The scratch of his fountain pen echoed as it carved bold strokes across the page. Claire exhaled in relief. Oliver collapsed into his chair. Evan sat in stunned silence, eyes blank, staring at nothing. Darnell didn't celebrate. He stayed calm. He knew this wasn't luck. It was the result of seeing through appearances, of understanding and respecting. On the projector, the old slide with the botched translation still hung frozen, but nobody cared anymore. Every eye was fixed on the moment of signing. The click of Kenji's pen closing rang louder than applause. The meeting had been saved and no one could deny it. The nameless security guard had turned the tide. Kenji stood, reached into his wallet, and drew out a special business card embossed with silver, a card reserved only for key partners. He stepped toward Darnell, bowed deeply, and offered it with both hands. The room was stunned. That ritual was never meant for a security guard. But Kenji had broken convention, making one thing clear: respect was earned through ability, not position. Darnell accepted the card, raising it with both hands as though it were sacred. His eyes glistened, not for himself, but for the justice now illuminated. Evan clenched his jaw. Oliver lowered his head. Claire allowed a quiet smile, as if faith in her work had been restored. The room felt brighter, not because of the lights, but because the balance of power had shifted from the leather chairs of the executives to the simple black uniform that carried true dignity. A week later, inside the hotel's conference room, Darnell walked in not as a guard this time, but as a special advisor for the Japanese market expansion project. Spread out on the table were bilingual plans, service processes, staff training, even fine details of the guest experience. Senior managers sat quietly, taking notes as Darnell spoke. Evan no longer sat at the head of the table. He was tucked in the back, scribbling silently. Claire spoke up. "We'd like you to lead the team for Japanese guests. No one is more qualified." Darnell was briefly taken aback, then nodded. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least now, he was no longer invisible. His voice carried weight. Morning light poured through the window, onto the plan, highlighting the words written across the top. Respect builds trust. A simple message, but one bought with the near collapse of a meeting. Meanwhile, the company's general manager pulled Evan aside, his voice low but sharp. "You let talent go unnoticed. Right under your nose. Your biggest mistake wasn't the translation fiasco, it was judging a man by his uniform." Evan lowered his gaze, silent. He knew this reprimand wasn't just aimed at him, but at the system that had fueled such prejudice. A system that overlooked true ability in order to protect pride and empty authority. The notebook in his hands snapped shut with a dry thud, a period at the end of an era. The walls of power he once relied on were crumbling. And in those cracks, a new order was taking shape. One where worth was measured not by rank, but by contribution and intellect. Later that day, Darnell passed through the lobby. He noticed a young new employee trying to give input, only to be brushed aside by an older coworker. The scene mirrored his own past. Darnell paused, walked over, and rested a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Go ahead," he said with a gentle smile. "Your ideas matter." The young man looked startled, then his eyes lit up. Darnell gave an encouraging nod before moving on toward the exit. Sunset spilled across the marble floor, casting his shadow long behind him, but this time, not alone. The revolving door opened, reflecting a man who was no longer just a guard, no longer just an advisor, but a living reminder. Human worth rises above rank, and respect never needs power to exist. The camera slowly pulled back as Darnell stepped outside, face at peace. A new cycle awaited, but this time, he would never let anyone remain unseen the way he once had been.